Chapter 13 The Rise of Mass Democracy, 1824. In the full enjoyment of the gifts of heaven, in the fruits of superior industry, economy, and virtue, every man is equally entitled to protection by law. But when the laws undertake to add those natural and just advantages, artificial distinctions, and exclusive privileges, the humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers, have a right to complain of the injustice of the government. Andrew Jackson, 1832. The reason why this quote is so important is specifically because Andrew Jackson represents that of the common man. He will run for office in 1824. So one of the things that we want to understand, especially looking at this quote, is he looks to represent the humble members of society, the farmers, the mechanics, and the laborers. The so-called era of good feelings was never entirely tranquil, but even the illusion of national consensus was shattered by the Panic of 1819 and the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Economic distress and the slavery issue raised the political stakes in the 1820s and 1830s. Vigorous political conflict, once feared, came to be celebrated as necessary for the health of democracy. New political parties emerged. New styles of campaigning took hold. A new chapter opened in the history of American and the world politics as many European societies began haltingly to expand their electorates and broaden democratic practices. The American political landscape of 1824 was similar in its broad outlines to that of 1796. By 1840, it would almost be unrecognizable. The deference, apathy, and virtually non-existent party organizations of the era of good feelings yielded to boisterous democracy, frenzied vitality, and strong political parties of the Jacksonian era. The old suspicion of the political parties as illegitimate disruptors of society's natural harmony gave way to an acceptance and even celebration and sometimes wild contentiousness of political life. In 1828, a new party, the Democrats, captured the White House. By the 1830s, the Democrats faced an equally vigorous opposition party, the Whigs. This two-party system is institutionalized divisions that had vexed the revolutionary generation came to constitute an important part of the nation's checks and balances on political power. New forms of politicking emerged in the era as candidates used banners, badges, parades, barbecues, free drinks, and baby kissing to get out the vote. Voter turnout rose dramatically. Only about one out of a quarter of the eligible voters cast a ballot in the presidential election of 1824, but that proportion doubled in. Sorry, I'm going to go back and reread that. I had to stop and get my food delivery. So I'm going to go back to that paragraph. New forms of politicking emerge in this era as candidates use banners, badges, parades, barbecues, free drinks, and baby kissing to get out that vote. Voter turnout rose dramatically. Only about 1.25 of eligible voters cast a ballot in the presidential election of 1824, but that proportion doubled in 1828. In the 1840 election, it reached 78%. Everywhere, people flex their political muscles. The corrupt bargain of 1824. So before we go back, or we start that, a couple things that we want to make sure we understand about these first three paragraphs. This first paragraph goes ahead right here and establishes that there were a lot of issues that were going on prior to this era, more specifically the Missouri Compromise and the Panic of 1819, which shows that this was not a time prior to this. It wasn't always necessarily an era of good feelings. There was a lot of conflict that was going on. A couple other things that you want to make sure that you understand looking at this paragraph is that they're in this time frame we're going to look at, there are going to be two new political parties that are going to merge, and these are going to be the Democrats as well as the Whigs. So this is going to be a move from the one-party system that was going on during the era of good feelings. And last but not least, one of the things that we're also going to look at is that there is going to be a new type of campaigning, right? This new form of campaigning, candidates are going to start using badges, banners, parades, barbecues, free drinks, and baby kissing to get out the vote. So more importantly, as voting proportion goes up, the candidates will use a type of campaigning that in some ways make them seem as if they are better than the other candidate, trying to reach out to everyone in order to gain popularity. What you want to do is go ahead, and if you look at your guided review questions, through this right here, we would have already answered the first three questions, 1, 2, and 3. What two political party systems emerged, and what new types of campaigning arose? 13.1. The corrupt bargain of 1824. The last of the old election styles is marked by the controversial corrupt bargain of 1824. The woods were full of presidential timber as James Monroe, the last of the Virginia dynasty, completed his second term. Four candidates above the others: John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts, highly intelligent, experienced, and aloof; Henry Clay of Kentucky, the gamey and gallant Harry of the West; William H. Crawford of Georgia, an able alien giant of an old man; and Andrew Jackson of Tennessee, the gaunt and gutsy hero of New Orleans. All four rivals professed to be Republicans. Well-organized parties had not yet emerged. Their identities were so fuzzy. In fact, South Carolina's John C. Calhoun appeared as the vice presidential candidate on both Adams and Jackson tickets. The results of this noisy campaign were interesting but confusing. Jackson, the war hero, clearly had the strongest personal appeal, especially in the West, where his campaign against the heroes of corruption and privilege in the government resonated deeply. He polled almost as popular. He polled almost as many popular votes as his next two rivals combined, but he failed to win a majority of the electoral vote. See Table 13.1. In such a deadlock, the House of Representatives, as directed by the 12th Amendment, see the amendments to the Constitution, must choose the top three candidates. Clay was eliminated, yet as Speaker of the House, he presided over the very chamber and had to pick the winner. So, a couple things, if you are taking your reading notes, one of the things that you want to make sure you use page is you label this the corrupt bargain of 1824. Some details that you want to make sure that you understand is that there are four candidates that are running. You have John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, and William H. Crawford. Another important fact that you want to make sure that you understand is that Andrew Jackson, the war hero, he goes ahead and he polls almost as many popular votes as his next two rivals combined, but he failed to win the electoral vote. So if you look at this table, one thing you want to make sure that you understand is that he wins. He's the most popular candidate. However, he does not get the majority of the electoral college vote. So therefore, the House of Representatives will need to go ahead and vote on it. Henry Clay, who was also running for office, is the Speaker of the House, and he presides over this chamber in which they will decide who is president. And of course, he goes ahead and he advocates, which we'll read about, John Quincy Adams. So big picture, if I were to sum up this corrupt bargain of 1824, you want to understand that the supporters of Andrew Jackson will feel as if they were robbed by Henry Clay as a result of him having the popular vote but not winning the election. If you look through our questions, we already would have answered questions 4 through 6 looking at the textbook. A Yankee misfit in the White House. John Quincy Adams was a chip of the old family glacier. Short, thick-set, billowed and bald, he was even more frigidly austere than his presidential father, John Adams. Shunning people, he often went for early morning swims, sometimes stark naked, and then the pure Potomac River. Essentially a closeted thinker rather than a politician, he was irritable, sarcastic, and tactless. Yet few individuals have ever come to a presidency with a more brilliant record in statecraft, especially in foreign affairs. He ranks as one of the most successful secretaries of the state, yet one of the least successful presidents. So what you want to understand here in this paragraph that I would write down, a Yankee misfit in the White House, is the key point here. They're saying that is John Quincy Adams. He's an excellent statesman. However, he's not necessarily doing that well as a president. A man of scrupulous honor, Adams entered upon his 4-year sentence in the White House, smarting under charges of bargain, corruption, and usurpation. Fewer than 1/3 of the voters had voted for him. As the first minority president, he would have found it very difficult to win popular support, even under the most favorable conditions. He did not possess many of the usual arts of the politician and scored on those who did. He had achieved high office by commanding respect rather than courting popularity. In an earlier era, an aloof John Adams had won the votes of propertied men by sheer ability. But the dawning age of backslapping and baby-kissing democracy, his cold-faced son could hardly hope for success at the polls.